Good morning and welcome to the Rochester Forum, 50 years of Title IX, looking back and looking ahead. This event is presented in collaboration with LILOC, the Lifelong Learning Advisory Committee. And I'm the co-chair with Dick Rasmussen, who you'll be hearing from in a little bit. Today's conversation will focus on the milestone 50th anniversary of Title IX, the landmark law barring sex discrimination in schools, and allowing women greater access to educational and athletic opportunities. Today, Title IX protects even more students from discrimination, giving them the ability to advance in athletics, STEM, and other educational spheres. If you would like to submit questions or communicate with the host, please use the Q&A section. The first session, the evolution of Title IX, will provide an overview of the history and development of Title IX at the university. Allow me to share a little bit about our presenters. Full biographies and headshots of all presenters can be found in the program file shared in the chat. Kate Nearpass is the Assistant Vice President for Civil Rights and Title IX Coordinator in the Office of Equity and Inclusion at the University, OEI. Kate's role was created in 2021 to ensure that the University of Rochester's continued compliance with its policy against discrimination and harassment, federal Title IX regulations, and affirmative action obligations. She heads OEI's Title IX equal opportunity and affirmative action efforts, including complaint investigations, policy work, and education and training of faculty and staff. Prior to joining OEI, Kate specialized in labor and employment law with a focus on discrimination and harassment. Most recently, she served as University Senior Counsel for Labor and Employment. Kate is a graduate of Mount Holyoke College and earned her law degree at Albany Law School. Tiffany Street is the Associate Director for Sexual Misconduct Prevention, Education and Response in the Office of Equity and Inclusion, also OEI. Tiffany has over a decade of experience at the university. Previous to their promotion in December of 2021, Tiffany was the Assistant Director for Educational Outreach in the Title IX office, which was an inaugural position created in 2018. And prior to that, they spent 6.5 years in the Department of Public Safety as Campus Resource Officer. Tiffany is responsible for coordinating sexual misconduct prevention and response, including the development of comprehensive, engaging, skill-building, training and programming for students at the university. They created Badass, I love that title, Bystander, an award-winning fresh take on bystander intervention that utilizes role plays to engage participants to explore their own unique intervention skills. Tiffany also regularly guest lectures in departments and schools across the university through their highly recommended Don't Cancel That Class program. Tiffany's passion and exceptional gift at making complex legal concepts easily digestible is one of the many talents they provide to university students, staff, and faculty. You'll frequently hear Tiffany talk about creating consent culture, one of their favorite sayings to promote culture change and to embed consent in all practices.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Jane, for that lovely introduction. I really appreciate it. I'm Kate Nearpass. I'm going to start off the presentation today, and then partway through, I will pass the baton to Tiffany, who will take over towards the end, and then we will both be very happy to answer questions. All right, I'm going to share my screen, and we'll get started. Okay. So this morning, I want to take us through, as the screen says, the evolution of Title IX from sort of the political climate that existed at the time that Title IX was enacted into law in 1972, all the way up until the current day. We'll talk a little bit about athletics and the impact, especially initially, that Title IX had on athletics. But I'm going to not focus entirely on that because I know we have the next panel who's going to focus on that quite a bit and talk about sort of where we are now in terms of Title IX and the public consciousness and where at my offices, TIFs, and my efforts really focus. So let's talk first about what Title IX is. Title IX, there's a wonderful, wonderful book by a woman named Sherry Bossert called 37 Words. And the title of that book comes from the 37 words that form the basis of the federal legislation. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. I think what's really interesting and maybe a little bit surprising about that language is it doesn't mention athletics at all. We'll talk a little bit about how the fight over how athletics came to be included in that language, but it was not initially passed as an athletics focused piece of legislation. So I'm going to ask you to bear with me. And I found this really lovely clip from CNN. I could not figure out a way to edit out the CNN guy from the beginning. So just bear with him for like 10 seconds. And this is a really excellent overview of sort of the evolution of Title IX and what I would like to focus on today. So here we go.
Hey, thanks for watching CNN 10. Our daily 10-minute shows are on pause for the summer, but we will be posting clips like this Monday through Friday until our regular programming resumes in August. So please enjoy, and to get notified of our content, please like and subscribe to this channel and keep up with us at CNN10.com.
So you might think Title IX is this 1970s law about women's and girls' access to sport, but it is about so much more. It is about sexual violence. It's about transgender rights. It's a piece of legislation that affects children, parents, professors, coaches, and it has transformed the world that we live in today. Title IX is a federal law meant to prevent gender and sex-based discrimination in entities that
Sorry about that.
receive federal assistance. The first chapter of Title IX's implementation is really associated with access and equality in sports. Catherine Switzer, this female runner who's told you can't run the marathon, she actually signs up under her initials a few years earlier and runs the Boston Marathon.
World's most famous foot race even attracts a leggy lady, Kay Switzer of Syracuse, who did.
But there's lots of stories like that. And what's really interesting is that as women like Switzer are pushing back on these assumptions that girls and women can't or shouldn't be physically active, they are succeeding. But Title IX almost immediately faces resistance. So you see during the 1980s that there are movements to kind of constrain the reach of Title IX. For example, there's one case, a Christian college called Grove City College, and Grove City College pushes back on the directive that they have to comply with Title IX regulations. They say, we don't actually have to comply because the only federal aid is these direct grants to students, which happen through this one office. But ultimately, it is decided that that doesn't stand, and that once federal money flows into an institution, it might go to a scholarship or a grant, but it flows throughout the institution and has impact. And so thus they are kind of beholden to Title IX.
Today, I'm directing every agency and executive department of our government to strengthen their enforcement of Title IX within the next 90 days.
In the 1990s, you start to have both kind of more rules regulating how Title IX is imposed, but there's also something new afoot, which is that Title IX starts to be used much more expansively around issues of sexual harassment and what comes to be known as sexual violence on campus. And so you see the expansion of this legislation to be applied where there might be harassment, either by teachers or by peers, that creates an unfair discriminatory environment. So if you think that early on, Title IX and sex-based discrimination is basically thought of as girls not getting an equal shot, by the time of the Obama administration, it's being expanded to say, hey, sexual orientation counts under this rubric. Hey, gender identity counts under this rubric. So they are both expanding the definition of what constitutes sex-based discrimination and continuing the fight for equality in sports. One of the signature moves of the Trump administration is actually to roll back Title IX protections, to remove transgender people. And then the second one is a series of decisions to make reporting of sexual violence more difficult.
There is no way to avoid the devastating reality of campus sexual misconduct. Lives have been lost. Lives of victims and lives of the accused.
So today, the most intense battles over how Title IX should fairly be carried out are absolutely about transgender rights. Today, we're talking about sports teams again. And now one of the most kind of hot button issues is about what is fair in terms of gender equality and inclusion of transgender athletes. The most high profile case is about Leah Thomas, a transgender woman swimmer at the University of Pennsylvania. Immediately was a lot of blowback about this being a kind of unfair advantage because Thomas retained, critics say, much of the advantage of her originally male physique. It's really been an issue which is kind of testing what the purpose and the limits and the proper implementation of Title IX is. So I think it's important to realize that for every step forward that Title IX has made in terms of safeguarding gender equality, there has been pushback and there has been backlash. And depending on the historical moment, some of that backlash has been more successful than others. We know from the history of Title IX that there can be real change, real institutional transformation can happen.
So let's go back to the beginning then and think about where we were pre-1972 when this was signed into law. So in 1964, we have the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is the landmark employment discrimination piece of legislation that still very much controls the scope of employment discrimination jurisprudence in the United States right now. Somebody files a claim in federal court that they believe that they've been discriminated against at work because of race, or sex or national origin, that is under this piece of legislation. So we have the concept of sex discrimination in employment emerging in the mid-1960s. The federal agency that enforces the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Within the first 2 years after the creation of the EEOC, there were more than 4,000 complaints of sex discrimination. So this concept is very much entering the public consciousness in the mid to late 1960s. Then we have in 1965, Title IV of the Civil Rights Act, which applies to educational institutions specifically, but it does not, and still does not today, include sex. So in the educational context, that Title IV prohibits discrimination based on race, color, and national origin. So there was this gap of sex discrimination in education, and that's where Title IX comes in to fill that gap. And I just thought these handful of anecdotes were so interesting to sort of remind us what things were like 50 years ago. So 1966, we have Lucy Bain Johnson, the daughter of LBJ, was refused readmission to Georgetown, the School of Nursing there, because she got married and they would not accept a married woman into that program. The University of Virginia, this was just astounding to me, did not accept women into its College of Arts and Sciences until 1970. Women had been petitioning for admission to UVA since 1892. There was a petition in 1892 by 400 Virginia teachers requesting admission. By 1900, 71% of US colleges and universities were co-ed. So 71%, and still 70 years later, UVA is not allowing women into this particular college. So in the late 60s, there's a lawsuit because UVA has finally caved somewhat to pressure, and they come up with this plan to transition, to begin allowing women. And their plan was to begin allowing a small amount of women in the late 60s. And then by 1980, their plan would be complete. And at that point, forever after, they would cap admission of women to 35% of the student population. And so there's a lawsuit over this. And in the end, there was never a judgment. The lawsuit ultimately settled, and the university agreed that it would begin admitting women, and then it would end by 1972, this sort of like staged rollout, and that there would ultimately be no cap on the admission of women to the university. I thought that was fascinating. In 1971, 18% of female high school graduates went on to complete 4 years of college, as opposed to 26% of male graduates. So that this is sort of where we are in the pre-Title IX era. So also at this time, we have the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA, which is stuck in committee. Senator Birch Bayh, a Democrat from Indiana, introduces an amendment to the ERA as a separate piece of legislation, and that becomes Title IX. Signed into law June 23rd, 1972 by President Nixon. It was largely authored by a woman named Patsy Mink, who is a representative from Hawaii. She is a fascinating person. She was the first woman of color to be elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. She represented Hawaii before its statehood. I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole learning about Patsy Mink. She was born in the 1920s in Hawaii, which of course was not a state at the time. She was born to Japanese parents and faced incredible amounts of discrimination, both based on her national origin and race and on her gender. She was incredibly bright, wanted desperately to go to medical school, and could not find a medical school in the United States that would admit her explicitly because of her gender. So, as many of us do, she fell back on law school, ended up going to law school, and then graduated, and again, could not find a law firm to hire her. So again, her fallback is politics. And she ends up representing Hawaii before it becomes a state. And then she transitions to becoming the representative from the state of Hawaii in Congress. And she's largely the author of Title IX. And in fact, in the 90s, during the 25th anniversary celebrations of Title IX, the law is technically renamed to be the Patsy T. Mink legislation. So Title IX is passed. And in that book I mentioned earlier, the Shelley Boschert book called 37 Words, she describes what happens next as the enraged awakening of the male athletics lobby. Title IX becomes almost instantly focused on the impact it will have on Title IX, because all of these extremely cash rich and important to institutions, these like football programs, these male athletic programs are feeling under pressure. What is going to happen? A lot of people still today kind of think of Title IX as like a pie. If the women athletics teams are going to need money, they're going to pull from ours. And this is a huge pushback. So we have a senator from Texas named John Tower, who introduces what's called the Tower Amendment. This is 2 years later. This is 1974. And the Tower Amendment is a push to specifically exclude athletics departments from Title IX. And this has a considerable amount of support. Another really interesting tidbit about Patsy Mink is that when this amendment is up for a vote in the House, again, it is a tight vote with big stakes. It goes up for a vote, and like moments before she's set to cast her vote, she gets a call that her daughter was in a very serious car accident. So she does what anyone would do, and she leaves and she gets on a plane to go see her daughter, who ends up being fine. And in a moment of bipartisanship that frankly seems absolutely astounding in today's political climate, there was bipartisan support to have a revote because she wasn't able to cast her vote initially. The first time when she wasn't able to vote, the amendment passed by 1 vote. They agree to the revote and the amendment loses. So it does not get codified into law. So at this point, we go forward, athletics is still very much a part of Title IX. We fast forward through the 70s. The case you may remember just was mentioned in the CNN clip is this case Grove City versus Bell, which is again is another attempt to carve athletics specifically out of Title IX. And so in this case, the argument that was put forth was Title IX is dependent on receiving federal funds. Not every facet of a college or university necessarily receives federal funds. And in Grove City's case, the argument they made was that only the financial aid office was receiving federal funds in so much as students received federally funded scholarships and grants that flowed through the financial aid office. So the argument they made is that our financial aid office is subject to Title IX, but nowhere else on campus should be subject to Title IX. And the court bought it. The Supreme Court agreed with that argument. And so then for 4 years, between 1984 and 1988, that was the way Title IX was applied. Then in 1998, we have the Civil Restoration Act, which course corrected Grove City versus Bell and made it very clear in the text of the law that Title IX it covers all programs of any and all educational institutions that receive any federal assistance at all. And from there, now we're into the 90s, and this is when we really start to see a shift in the way that we think about Title IX as not just an athletics statute. We start to think a lot about Title IX, its prohibitions on sex discrimination, and what that means more broadly, specifically sexual harassment, sexual violence on campus. So I'm going to play you another clip that I think is a good encapsulation of the way that we now start to think about Title IX as being a bit more broad.
Nine things to know about Title IX in 89 seconds.
1. Title IX is a landmark federal civil rights law that prohibits sex discrimination in education. Title IX is not just about sports. It also addresses sexual harassment, gender-based discrimination, and sexual violence.
2. Title IX does not apply to female students only. Male and gender nonconforming students are protected too.
3. Schools must be proactive in ensuring that your campus is free of sex discrimination. They can't just wait for something to go wrong.
4. Schools must have an established procedure for handling complaints of sex discrimination, harassment, and violence. 5. Schools must take immediate action to ensure that a survivor can continue his or her education safely.
Number 6. Schools may not retaliate or let someone else retaliate against a victim filing a complaint.
7. Schools can issue a no-contact directive to prevent the accused student from interacting with you, kind of like a restraining order from your school.
8. In cases of sexual violence, schools are prohibited from encouraging or allowing informal mediation of the complaint rather than a formal hearing.
9. Schools cannot discourage you from your continuing education since you have a right to education under Title IX.
You have a right to remain on campus and have every educational program and opportunity available to you.
If your rights aren't being respected, you have options. Visit knowyour9.org and check us out on Facebook and Twitter.
So this is the shift that we start to see in the 90s. We start to see the government making it explicit that Title IX's prohibition on sex discrimination covers sexual harassment, including sexual assault, because that sort of misconduct impairs equal educational access. Colleges and universities are explicitly warned that if they don't investigate and adjudicate these cases of sexual harassment and sexual assault, they might be violating Title IX, putting their federal funding at risk through an investigation by the Office of Civil Rights. So during the Obama administration is when we start to see this really put into specific words from the administration. In 2011, we have what's called the first Dear Colleague letter. So this is put out by the Office of Civil Rights, which is a part of the Department of Education, and it is the federal agency that is responsible for enforcing Title IX. They conduct investigations, they receive complaints, and so OCR puts out this Dear Colleague letter. This is the first time colleges and universities are receiving specific guidance about how they should be responding to, investigating, adjudicating allegations of sexual harassment and other sexual misconduct on campus. Now, it's important, I think, to understand that the Dear Colleague letter is non-regulatory guidance. So when a federal agency puts out regulatory guidance, federal regulations, that goes through a very regimented process of there's a notice of proposed rulemaking, and then there's a notice and comment period. And that does not happen with the Dear Colleague letter in 2011. Nonetheless, colleges and universities feel very much like they're obliged to comply with this, because this is OCR saying this is how we interpret Title IX. And OCR is the agency that would investigate a complaint that a college or university is not complying with Title IX. So the 2011 DCL announces requirements for protocols for addressing allegations of sexual misconduct, and OCR around this time launches hundreds of well-publicized investigations into colleges and universities. 5 years later, this is still the Obama administration. This is the tail end of the Obama administration. We have another DCL, this one specifically on the rights of transgender students, requiring schools to provide access to things like bathrooms, showers, dorm rooms, any sort of facility that is sex segregated. That access needs to be provided on the basis of a student's gender identity rather than their sex assigned at birth. This is short-lived because, of course, Trump is elected, and in 2017, the Trump administration revokes the DCL on transgender rights. So it's not even in place for a full year. Title IX was a huge focus of, if you'll recall, the campaign in 2016. The 2016 Republican platform devoted an entire separate section to Title IX, claiming that the original purpose of the law had been perverted, quote, by bureaucrats and by the current president of the United States to impose a cultural and social revolution upon the American people, unquote. So this is a big focus. And we know going into the Trump administration, not only that the 2017 transgender rights DCL is going to be on the chopping block, but that the Trump administration plans to impose new Title IX regulations. So the 2011 DCL is also withdrawn by the Trump administration. And then in 2020, we get the Trump regulations. You saw Betsy DeVos speaking in the CNN clip earlier. That was at the press conference when these 2020 regulations were announced. Everyone knew that they were coming. This is the first time we have official regulations from the Department of Education on Title IX. And it's a huge shift. Now, by the way, these are the regulations that we are living under right now. So there's a number of things in these regulations that are very, very different than the way many colleges and universities had been handling sexual misconduct complaints to this point. For example, the regulations now require a hearing the University of Rochester had already been conducting hearings on sexual misconduct complaints, because in addition to Title IX, we are also subject to a New York State law, Section 129B of the Education Law, which is also generally referred to as the Enough is Enough law. That was Governor Cuomo who signed that into law. That requires hearings. So we were already doing hearings, but many schools outside of New York State were not conducting hearings at this point. So the Trump regulations require hearings. Very significantly, they also require cross-examination of parties at hearings. That was new to us. That was new to pretty much every college and university. We had to come up with a process to allow cross-examination of parties at hearings. There's also a choice of standard, meaning that a college and university could have what's called a preponderance of the evidence standard, which is a very low, it's often described as 50% plus a feather. Is it more likely than not that this happened, or isn't it? So a college or university could use that standard, or it could choose to use a much higher standard called clear and convincing. One of the other really significant changes of these regulations is that the standard for sexual harassment complaints is raised, whereas it previously had been sexual harassment in order to violate Title IX needed to be severe or pervasive. And the Trump regulations changed that to severe and pervasive and objectively offensive, which is a very high standard. It is much higher than the standard for sexual harassment in employment discrimination claims, for example. And the scope is contracted. Now Title IX is only limited generally to on-campus behavior, only behavior that happens at a place that the university has control. So this is a huge, this is incredibly upsetting and unsettling, and I mean, it just sets off a bomb in the Title IX space. Colleges and universities all over the country racing to put new policies into place, to put these regulations into effect. And, depending on your perspective on it, some viewed this very much as a course correction from the 2011 Dear Colleague letter, which some people viewed as being too complainant or victim oriented. And a lot of, the Republican platform of 2016, for example, had the perspective that respondents were really suffering, that they weren't getting a fair shake at getting to tell their story, and that the processes in place at colleges and universities was very much slanted towards victims and complainants. Other folks perceived these regulations as very much constricting the rights of complainants and victims. Probably the most controversial of these new requirements was the cross-examination requirement, because it was perceived very much that victims or complainants would just not want to come forward and go through this process if they knew that they were going to be cross-examined by most likely a lawyer representing the respondent or the accused. So, as I said, those regulations are still in place today. Our policy at the university is based on those 2020 regulations. We did this summer receive a notice of proposed rulemaking from the Biden administration. So we knew when Biden became elected that this was one of his priorities. Nobody really had a sense of what the timing was going to be, but he was not shy about saying that he intended to overhaul the Title IX regulations. So we know from the notice of proposed rulemaking from this summer that there are going to be a number of significant changes if the proposed regulations end up mirroring the final regulations. So the proposed rules make it very clear that sexual orientation and gender identity are covered by Title IX. It would expand or maybe re-expand the scope of Title IX to cover some off-campus behavior. It would expand the universe of potential complainants beyond those who are currently enrolled or participating in an education or program or activity. It would expand the use of informal resolution, and significantly, it would make both cross-examination and live hearings optional. Of course, at the University of Rochester, we would still be required to conduct hearings because of our obligations under Enough is Enough, but we would not necessarily be obligated to have cross-examination at hearings. So that's where we are. We know, so the notice of proposed rulemaking was in the summer. The public comment period ended in September. The Department of Education is now reviewing comments and making final changes. We don't have a timeline yet for the final regulations. So we're all just sort of waiting and wondering what that's going to be. It will involve at the University of Rochester a significant amount of policy revision if we get new regulations. So I'm going to pass this off to Tiffany right now, who's going to talk about Title IX specifically at the University of Rochester, our policies and what we do for students and how we educate them. Tiff, if you just want to let me know when you're ready for me to advance the slide, I can do that.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kate. So as Kate mentioned, this is an ever-changing landscape. And so this is a really tough area sometimes as an educator to let not only our students know, but our community know about all of the changes to our policies. As you see, we had a huge change in 2020. If everybody could remember where they were in 2020, it was the height of COVID. So not only are they issuing this during a change, but it's also when students are coming back onto campus in August, right after a year of basically being remote and trying to envision what that environment would look like. And now we're going out with a whole new policy for when students return on campus. So because of that, we had to create a Title IX policy. As Kate had mentioned, this is now federal regulation from the Department of Education. So no longer is it guidance, which allows a university to create their own language. So previous to that, we've always had a student sexual misconduct policy. And like Kate said, there are other laws that kind of govern the work we do, such as the New York State Enough is Enough law. And so our sexual misconduct policy for students has been pretty robust. So that's something where we could put different language in. We might have a higher standard for sexual assault or domestic violence or dating violence, right? But when the Title IX policy had to happen, we had to go in and adjust some of the language to make sure that it mirrored both policies. Imagine being an educator trying to talk about this to students. It's confusing. So we try to do it as clear as possible. In addition to those two policies, now the Title IX policy applies to everybody. Our student sexual misconduct policy applies to our students, undergrad and graduate. And then we have our policy against discrimination and harassment, which again is where a lot of our complaints live on the basis of a protected class. However, there could also be some sexual harassment complaints going that way. If it does not rise to that level of that significant threshold, like Kate had mentioned, severe and pervasive and objectively offensive, which is again, a very high standard to meet. So a lot of the times you'll see if there's a complaint involving faculty or staff, contractors, visitors at the institution, it will likely go through that policy against discrimination and harassment. And I'm sure Kate can attest to this. They just released yesterday in the at Rochester, the numbers, and our numbers are quite high. It was about 600, was it Kate, 659 reports, something like that?
95.
695. I got my numbers confused there. So as you can see, we do get a lot of these complaints, and we do get a significant amount of complaints also with students. So we have to figure out what policy will it go into. We're always looking at that Title IX threshold first. And if it doesn't reach that high standard, then we always have a policy for it to go under. So it's not to say if it doesn't become a Title IX policy violation that it goes away and we don't care about it at the university. That's quite the opposite. We always make sure it'll be looked at pursuant to our student sexual misconduct policy. If you want to hit next, Kate. So again, the important kind of component and piece of this is that really we want to get supportive measures to our students or folks who have been impacted by any types of sexual misconduct or violence. A lot of times it's, they're suffering. They're suffering in their mental wellness, in their physical spaces, in their academic spaces. It really could kind of run a huge gamut of types of behaviors and the impacts. So for us, when we meet with students, our first goal is really to talk about them, about these supportive measures and these resources that we can offer. I really, we have to share about reporting options, of course, in our meetings, but it's never always the focal point when discussing with students about options. We have to share it and we provide it in a way that it's digestible so that they can make a best informed decision. However, really the bulk of our meeting with students is to talk about what is it that you need that's going to make things a little bit easier for you. So we do see that the vast majority of our students that meet with us do not pursue a formal grievance procedure. I do think that has changed a little bit. I've been here previous to the Trump administration changing the law. And so I did see previous to COVID in 2019, we actually had the highest number of formal complaints going to hearings of our students in the time that I had been in this work. But once kind of COVID hit and once the regulations changed, I did see a drop off in the numbers of folks that wanted to go through with that. And I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that the policy changed, this federal guidance became this regulation, and the cross-examination piece is a big holdup for folks to go into these hearings. So again, we focus then more on the bulk of how can we support you. And a lot of the times it could be supportive measures. A huge one is academic accommodations. So for folks who are faculty or were faculty, you might get an email from us saying, hey, we're from Title IX and we have to give these academic accommodations to the student, work with us, work with the student. The burden's on us as staff, as faculty, as an institution to ensure that we're providing access to our students who are impacted by Title IX to be able to be successful. That is, like Kate said, the 37 words, the bulk of the law. That is the whole entire goal of it. We do issue active avoidance orders and to ensure that our students or faculty or staff can be kept safe while they're here. You know, it's basically stay away from each other, don't communicate with each other. And it's not a punitive order. However, it can become one if it's violated. And we work with our Center for Student Conflict Management and the Department of Public Safety to work towards reporting those and enforcing those if we need to for a student. Again, we really could do a lot of other things. We work closely with our University Counseling Center. We work with Residential Life. We'll work with parking if you need a parking pass. Really, whatever a student needs, as long as we consider it reasonable. And for the most part, we work really diligently to help in any capacity that we can and make sure that we get these supportive measures. And again, as Kate had mentioned, these supportive measures are not just complainant-based. They are complainant, witness, and respondent-based. So, you know, our office is responsible for working with both students involved, the student who's saying this bad thing happened to me and the student that's being accused of doing the bad thing. And we'll make sure that they have access to these supportive measures. You can hit next, Kate. So in terms of our policy, we obviously have training we have to do. And if you're wondering how many folks I train every year, if Kate wants to hit next, you actually will be able to see the numbers of the amount of folks that I train at the institution. Now, the last I checked, we have just about under 13,000 registered students. And so far to date, we have trained 13,085 students. My sole responsibility is not to train staff and faculty, but I will never turn away groups of folks who need training. So as you can see the numbers there, I do train staff and faculty throughout the year as well. Obviously, our odd number out of those training years is 2020, because really, truly, once COVID hit, we were all adjusting to remote life, and all these programs that we had scheduled all got canceled until we kind of got our feet back from under us about how virtual training and programming was going to work. That kind of took a little bit of an impact, but we are never not having work to do. I know that was a double negative. We have lots and lots of folks that we are required to train, in addition to the fact that we want to train people. So in general, each academic semester, we are required to provide training to all of our incoming undergraduate and graduate students, to include transfer students. So in the spring, it's a lesser number. You know, we look at typically about 55 incoming first year students, but our graduate students are still about 500. We also additionally will train all athletes. They do receive training annually, whether they get that virtually or through an online orientation or training platform, or they get to see me and do some additional training. We also are required to do and to provide training to all new members of fraternities and sororities, because they are considered a risk group. And if anybody's paying attention to the news, we just found out that Cornell has permanently suspended fraternities and sororities because of a sexual assault and drugging allegation that was running through the fraternity. So this is something that's prevalent. And I talk about that with our fraternity and sorority new members, which I'm actually training this afternoon. And then we also have to do all student leaders. Again, there's an idea that you're a leader. We want you to have this training on how to be a leader to your community, and that you care deeply about these issues of sexual violence prevention, creating consent culture, being a badass bystander. So some of the photos that are over here on the side are the programs that we run quite frequently at the university. As Jane had said so graciously during my bio, Badass Bystander is our bystander intervention program here. It is an national award-winning program. And although it's really fun that we have to say that we are badass, it is an acronym. So it means being aware, deciding to act, and saying something. So we really crammed as much cool stuff into that as we could. It's a 2.5-hour course. It's also part of our medallion leadership program here. So you also get additional leadership credit for it. You get swag. And we put, again, participants into role plays. So they get to actually learn skills. It starts to embed in their muscle memory. Again, as I mentioned, don't cancel that class. So for faculty or staff who know that they have a scheduled absence and they were thinking about canceling their class, I can come in and teach. And I've also worked with faculty from all over the institution, Eastman, Simon, Warner, you name it, to embed my content into coursework. Or it could just be, hey, it's a biomechanical engineering course, come talk about sexual misconduct prevention. Down here are the flags that you might see each October, which is Dating and Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which just happened. We also do blue flags in April for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So I always encourage folks, if they want to help us put 1,000 flags into the ground, you can always reach out to me. And then this is our Clothesline project, which is a really unique project. It's a national project that dates back on our campus. We have t-shirts that date back to 2000. We do a modified paper t-shirt version sometimes just because it's easier to hang up. But really I could go on and on and on about training and education. I'm very lucky. I love what I do. I love teaching students about a really tough topic, and somehow, being able to embed some sort of connection and humor and lightness in a really tough topic. And I'm really proud to say we do a lot of work each year, as you've seen the numbers over here, on getting training to students. It is a large undertaking to try to hit all of our students. Our graduate students are most of the time, doing schoolwork. Our full-time adults have lives that are different than our undergraduates. And so sometimes it's tough to get in their spaces. And if you ask anybody, hey, the sexual misconduct training you take, and they're going to go, yep, I know, I got it online, I got it orientation, I got it halfway throughout the year because I was a student leader or a student employee, and I saw you, Tiff. And that's the goal. The goal is to kind of always have that prevention work there. And if anybody's interested, we also have social media that I'm pretty proud of. We have a decent amount of following on Instagram, more specifically than Facebook, but Instagram and Facebook, that's the same handle at UR Title IX. And I will let Kate click. I think we're at our question time. So if folks have questions, we are going to read them out, and Kate or I will both answer them. So let me just pull up the first question really quick. So Kate, this could be you or I, but what offices at the university do you regularly work with? Are there other staff members dedicated to this work? So Kate, you want to take part of that, and I can take part of it?
Yeah, I can say who I work with, and then I think there are additional offices that you probably work with more than me. So on a weekly, if not daily basis, I work closely with human resources. That's specifically with respect to the complaints that my office receives about faculty and staff behavior that might be discriminatory or harassing. We work very closely with public safety whenever there is a complaint of discrimination or harassment that creates a safety risk. Very often that involves student complaints of things like stalking behavior or dating or domestic violence. We work very closely with the Student Conduct Office because, of course, any violation of Title IX is ultimately a potential student conduct issue that could result in discipline that office imposes. We work closely with the Burgett Intercultural Center. Thank you. Who partners with us very often when we have bias incidents that are submitted through their bias incident reporting system, which can be, they're generally complaints that come from students. They can be about faculty or staff. They can be about other students, and we work with them to resolve those complaints. I'm sure there's others. Tiff, what am I forgetting?
Yeah, for me, we work in terms of prevention education. I work with a lot of folks, but in terms of some of the folks we kind of regularly, communicate with, the CARE network, which does also encompass some of the bias-related incidents reports. We have Residential Life. We do communicate pretty frequently with. We do have to make accommodations for folks. The University Counseling Center. Really, truly, there's not an office out there that we don't communicate with in some capacity, depending on what might be happening with either a student or, like Kate said, if there's also faculty or staff that need accommodations or some sort of connection. In terms of prevention and education, I run the gamut of orientation, res life, fraternity and sorority affairs, athletics, Wilson Common student activities, any of the student clubs and organizations within graduate schools. So we really have quite a huge group with that. And I didn't get a chance to say, but I also chair a committee that is required to have bring folks from all over the institution. So undergraduate students, graduate students, faculty and staff from respective areas and respective schools. It is obviously a little bit AS&E undergraduate heavy, but they help provide, consult input, programming ideas, education efforts, anything in the policy that we might need to look at and adjust. And then are there other staff members dedicated to this work? Yes. We have several deputy Title IX coordinators for each of the athletic schools, and Chris Shanley, who's going to be coming up in a future panel, who's our deputy for athletics specifically. We also have administrative support, which we are so desperately very happy to have administrative support because Christine keeps Kate and I's head on. We also have other folks within the Office of Equity and Inclusion that we frequently interface with, and Kate could maybe spend a little bit of time talking about the investigative team that you work with.
Yeah. We have a director of investigations and 5 director of investigations, a lead investigator, and 4 additional investigators who are dedicated to conducting the investigations into both Title IX complaints that go through our formal grievance process, as well as conducting investigations into complaints that come in under our policy against discrimination and harassment, which is the policy that applies to faculty and staff behavior. So it is a very robust team of highly trained investigators, all former practicing lawyers who are working on the significant number of complaints that we get.
And I want to say, even though we might not have other dedicated staff, there are staff and faculty from across this institution that care deeply about sexual violence and, seeing an end to it. And so I know that a lot of the folks that we work with and we frequently communicate with are also our allies in that work. And a lot of folks are doing other work that might couple a lot of the same topics in terms of education efforts. The other question, and I'll let Kate answer this one. What do you think the future of Title IX holds?
Well, it's not getting smaller. I'll say that. I mean, certainly if the proposed Biden regulations go into effect, that will expand the scope of Title IX and expand colleges and universities' obligations to look into complaints of sexual misconduct beyond where we even are right now. The amount of sort of administrative effort that is going to have to be put behind adjudicating and resolving these concerns is already quite large. We just described to you what our compliance team looks like. It's going to have to get bigger. This is, I think it is a very good thing, even though it feels a little bit counterintuitive to say that the numbers of complaints that we have are so high, because it's been very clear to me in the 12 or 13 years that I've been doing this type of work that people are just much, much more willing to come forward when they are a victim of sexual misconduct now than they were even 5 years ago. And I don't think that trend is going to reverse itself. I think that the high numbers are reflective of that people are willing to come forward, not that there is more sexual misconduct or more discrimination and harassment that's happening now than there was 15 years ago. And so I think that's a very good thing that people are willing to come forward and say, this happened to me, please fix this. I don't want this to happen to somebody else. So I see that trajectory continuing.
The other question we have is, what can the university community do to support your efforts?
One of the things that my office has been really focused on this year is getting the word out. I think, as Jane said in the introduction, our Office of Equity and Inclusion is only 2 years old. That doesn't mean Title IX work and work in investigating discrimination and harassment complaints didn't happen at the university until 2 years ago, but it's been consolidated, and there's been a lot of there's been a lot of resources that the university has put behind this office in the last 2 years. And so I think a continued support of our office is going to be really important. But then, one of the other things that we've been focused on is getting the word out to the rest of the community, the university community, that our office exists. This is what we do. If you become aware of a concern that implicates one of the policies that we handle, please tell us. And so that sort of education and like spreading the word about what our office does and how other folks can help support our work is really important.
And then Kate, we have one from an anonymous attendee that might be pretty easy for us to answer. So out of the number of complaints, what is the most prevalent? And if you want to go look at our report, which the folks here just dropped in the chat, for us, it's sexual harassment. That's our number one complaint. I don't know if Kate, you have anything else in terms of PADH that you have, but I know that that chart was broken down on that report as well.
Yeah, I should probably go back and look up the numbers, but my recollection is that when we look specifically at complaints that are brought against faculty and staff under our PADH, which is broader than sexual misconduct, it covers other types of harassment and discrimination. I think we get more race discrimination complaints, and sexual harassment is a close second.
Yeah. I think that is our last question.
Okay.
So
thank you very much.
Jump off.
Thank you so much, Tiffany and Kate, for this very eloquent presentation about such a vital topic.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our presentation this morning for our second panel, our presentation on Title IX in athletics. Before we get started, I want to thank once again Kate and Tiffany for their presentation in the previous session. I like to think of myself as someone who's fairly knowledgeable around Title IX, but I learned an awful lot from their presentation. So wonderful job. Thank you very much, Kate and Tiffany. My name is Dick Rasmussen. I'm the co-chair along with Jane Tuttle of the LILAC, the Lifelong Learners Advisory Committee of the university. And I want to welcome you to our program this morning. I guess somewhat fittingly, I'm a 1972 graduate of the University of Rochester. And since that time, I've been a staff member here at the university for 50 years, 14 years as an assistant football coach and head baseball coach at the university, and for the last 36 years as the executive director and now executive vice president of the University Athletic Association, our athletic conference comprising 8 major research universities, of which the University of Rochester is a member. I also have a son and daughter who attended the university. My son Bill played baseball and was a captain of the baseball team for 2 years, and my daughter Jessica played volleyball and was also captain of the volleyball team for 2 years. So we've enjoyed watching athletics here at the university for a long time. During my tenure at the University Athletic Association, I spent 6 years as a member of the NCAA Committee on Women's Athletics. And that was a particularly satisfying experience for me, and particularly because of some of the work we accomplished. In particular, we took on two major areas of concern at that time. This was in the late 1990s. The first was adding a clear definition to the role of the senior woman administrator on campuses and making efforts to empower women in those roles on campuses to be strong advocates for female student athletes and women's programs on their campus from both a Title IX perspective, but also from the perspective of gender equity. And then the other area that we took on head on were efforts to address the impact of homophobia on female student athletes and female coaches in particular, and to educate the membership in that area and develop a non-discrimination policy for the NCAA that included sexual orientation as part of the protections that should be afforded to all participants, student athletes, coaches, and staff members involved in intercollegiate competition. I'm happy to again introduce you to our 4 distinguished panelists here this morning. And as a reminder, the full biographies and headshots of each of the panelists are available on the link that was provided earlier in the chat. And I don't know that we may be putting that up again. First of all, serving as the moderator for the panel this morning is Christine Shanley. Chris is the Associate Director of Athletics and Recreation, overseeing varsity and Gergen athletics operations. She's also the Senior Woman Administrator and Deputy Title IX Coordinator at the university. In 1998, Chris was selected as the head coach for the inaugural varsity softball team at the University of Rochester. And for the past 25 years, Chris has served in several roles on the leadership team at Rochester. Chris's journey in athletics began at third base in the Cinderella Softball League, morphed into travel ball and the opportunity to play in the ASA championships. And then while at SUNY Brockport, Chris was a 3-year captain on the Golden Eagles softball team, which was later selected as the team of the decade at Brockport. Off the field, Chris studied physical education and pursued a master's degree in recreation and leisure studies. She officiated Section 5 high school basketball, softball, and football. And at the collegiate level, Chris umpired softball and was a longtime basketball official at the Division I level. Chris recognizes the importance of female participation in all aspects of athletics and seeks out opportunities to provide mentorship and encouragement to female student athletes and coaches on campus. Chris welcomes interns from local colleges and fully integrates them within her work. Chris continues to play softball competitively. She golfs recreationally and participates in CrossFit, all while cheering on the Yellow Jackets. Jacqueline Bapquette, a 1981 graduate of the university, is the Deputy Athletic Director, Senior Woman Administrator, and Deputy Title IX Coordinator at Columbia University. She has oversight of varsity athletics and is instrumental in the day-to-day operations of the department, including managing physical education and recreation. Jackie joined the staff at Columbia University in 1989 as the head coach of women's track and field and cross-country programs, transitioning to athletics administration in 1993. Prior to her work at Columbia, Jackie served as the head track and field coach at Rochester Institute of Technology and the head cross-country track and field coach at the University of Rochester, where she led the Yellow Jackets to their best ever NCAA finish as the national runner-up at the 1989 NCAA championships. 7 of the 9 members of the Rochester Hall of Fame competed under her leadership. Active in NCAA Division I governance, Jackie began service to the NCAA Division I membership in 2002. She is currently a member of the NCAA Division I Council, serving on their executive board and as the vice chair of the legislative subcommittee. Jackie is also active in the NCAA Division I Transformation Committee as a member of the Modernization Rules Subcommittee. Her continuous service included work on several other committees as well. A Barbados native who grew up in Brooklyn, Jackie was an outstanding athlete at the University of Rochester, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology. And at times during her spare time, she also babysat my son, Bill, and my daughter, Jennifer. Jade Posse, the Associate Director of Athletics, is a longtime University Athletics Administrator and former coach. In 1975, she came to Rochester from Syracuse University to coach field hockey and women's basketball. In the same year, she initiated the University of Rochester's women's lacrosse team and continued to coach for the next 17 years. Jane played a major role in opening up new opportunities for the university's female athletes, such as daily practice schedules, the shared use of alumni gym and field house, and full-time coaches. In 1992, Jane began overseeing the university's recreation program, capital planning, project management, events management, and student employment. She has been the point person on many athletics buildings and renovation initiatives, including the Spiegel Wilbraham Aquatic Center, the Block Fitness Center, and various facilities within and across the Brian F. Prince Athletic Complex. Jane is a recipient of numerous awards and honors, including the Gergen Award for Distinguished Contributions to Undergraduate Learning, a Susan B. Anthony Lifetime Achievement Award, the Rochester Press Radio Club's G. Giambroni Service Award, and the Catherine Lee Award from the Eastern College Athletic Conference, the highest award the ECAC presents to a female athletics administrator. An endowment has been established in James' name to enhance the athletic opportunities for female students at the University of Rochester. And finally, Sarah Sevenler, the class of 15, was named the new director of rowing and women's rowing head coach of her alma mater in August of 2021. She has over 15 years of rowing and coaching experience, most recently coming at Columbia University, where she served as assistant coach during the 2021 season. Sarah previously coached at RIT and the University of Buffalo. She earned a bachelor's degree from Rochester in 2015, double majoring in business and digital media studies, and earned a master's degree in higher education from the University of Buffalo in 2017. With that, I'll turn the program over to Chris, who will moderate the session this morning. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Dick. In front of you, I can't imagine what you're thinking, but to see 4 women who have spanned 5 decades of Title IX, pre-Title IX and post, is virtually amazing. The experiences that you all have had, I hope we can share in the next few minutes that we have together. As Dick mentioned, I have been at the university for about 25 years. And I did start as the inaugural softball coach in 1998, which to me is a bit curious because Title IX was passed in 72. But with that, Jane, if you'd like to kick us off with some of your experiences here at the university.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Dick. Yes, I too am a 1972 graduate, but not from U of R. So Skidmore College is where I ended up. And when I left undergraduate work and went to Syracuse University to start my master's degree, it was a graduate assistantship, and therefore I had to be enrolled in the master's program in order to teach within a university that has a physical education degree. So I enrolled and was assigned to be the head field hockey coach, the head women's women's diving and swimming coach. And then that year, I also started the university's women's lacrosse program, which, as many of you may know, has done very, very well over the last few years. So having left there, coming to Rochester, I was the head field hockey coach in basketball and started women's lacrosse here. Throughout my early education, my high school was completely an all-women's school. My colleges were all women's schools. Until I got to Syracuse was the first time I was actually involved with working with men. But in a way, not really, because the women there at that time in that year, we were separate from each other. We had different buildings, we had different administrators, even though my administrator reported directly to the director of athletics. So it wasn't a lot of interaction, but I felt very, very supportive. I was very, very lucky to have women who supported women's programs. And so when I got to Rochester, this was my first experience with really working a little bit more with men. Although in a way that first year in 75 was still, the women were in the Spurrier gym and the men were in alumni gym. We would have staff meetings once a month, but always in Fauver Stadium, never at each other's facilities. So it was just a very, very interesting time. My basketball career was 3 years long before I started having a family. And then I came back after that and coached field hockey and lacrosse for 17 years. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Jane. Jackie, let's hear a little bit from you. Oh, you're muted.
I always forget to unmute.
I hear you. It's always like the first time we're doing it, right?
Yes, every time's the first time. Thank you, Chris. I wish I could be there in person to reunite with Jane and Dick and Sarah, who hold a great special place in my heart, and to Katie and Tiff, wonderful, wonderful first session. I learned a lot, but I also am going to steal a lot here at Columbia. My journey to Rochester and beyond really does tie to Title IX. We immigrated to Brooklyn the year after Title IX was enacted. The high school that I attended had no sports. It was an all-women school. As Chris said earlier, it took a little while, right? We didn't just enact the law and the spigot turned on and right away the water flowed. And so for the 4 years of high school, I had no athletics. When I enrolled at the University of Rochester, I had done sports in Barbados, and there was a sign that was posted all over campus that said track and field meeting. Now, back then, there was no need for the meeting sign to be gender specific. I didn't realize that, but there wasn't a need for gender specificity at that point. And so I followed the signs and the directional arrows. A friend who wanted to try out for the team said, "You've run, come go with me." We wound our way through the men, what was the men's facility, and we ended up in the men's locker room. So you can imagine the look on the faces of those young men as in walk 2 first-year women from Brooklyn. I will say that to his credit, Tim Hale did not bat an eye. He said, "Take a seat, listen to the meeting, and then I will meet with you afterwards." And at that point, after the meeting, he said, "If you're truly interested in running, come to my office the next day." I say that to say that Title IX has never been a fight for women by women only. It has taken men and everyone involved to make sure that this fight continues. Under Tim's tutelage, I was able to have a pretty good career at the University of Rochester. We were able to elevate the team to varsity in my junior year. The brain gets fuzzy after a little while. And I was able to attend the AIWA Nationals as a senior. At that point, the NCAA had not yet recognized Title IX and enacted championships for women. So there are 2 critical pieces that formed the basis for my career moving forward. One was that change in elevation in varsity status, pushed for by Tim Hale, who understood that the law and what the law meant, and therefore wanted to be a part of that change. And then the NCAA is finally recognizing that it was time and taking over championships, which, as you now know, there are at least 90 championships that the NCAA will put on a yearly basis. So the journey has been interwoven with the Title IX law and the changes around that. And so with that, Chris, I will turn it back to you.
All right, thank you, Jackie. Sarah, being maybe one of the newer people who have benefited from Jane and Jackie's work, along with so many others, tell us a little bit more about your experiences as a student, as well as now the director of rowing.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be on this panel with everyone. We've had a chance to catch up, and I've heard stories. And for me, I went into this thinking, what can I really offer? Because the benefits of Title IX are something I haven't really thought much about, because I started rowing at U of R in 2011, and the rowing program became varsity in 2008. And so a lot of the struggles that I've been hearing and we've been talking about are things that I didn't have to deal with directly. And so it's been really interesting and I think important for me to hear these stories, and I'm excited to pass them along. I came from Mercy High School, which is a local high school in Rochester. It's an all-girls school. So again, in high school, I didn't really face a lot of these issues with maybe the men's teams getting priority over the women's teams, because it was just women's teams. My mom, she rowed at Ohio State, and she was recruited to to swim there. She would have been a great rower. And so she's told me some stories. And so she was one of the first years to be able to benefit from Title IX. So right now I'm overseeing a group of 50 women. Our women's team is varsity and our men's team is club. So I'm the director of rowing, so I'm the women's head coach and I oversee our men's program. So our men's program is significantly smaller and they're still able to really benefit from having a women's varsity sport and a women's varsity rowing team. And our women's team, it's just really remarkable to see the size of our team right now. And just to see these young female athletes being supported really well and just enjoying their time at U of R. So it's been really exciting for me as an alumni to come back and to see this program continue to grow and to see more people benefit from this varsity sport.
Very nice. So I'm thinking about the fact that, Jackie, you mentioned that so many people, men, women, are involved in the support of and making sure that Title IX is effective for generations to come. Can we talk a little bit about how we've seen it evolve over the 50 years? How have things changed? Jackie, you mentioned the AIAW. I don't know if everybody knows what that is. And now the NCAA. Jane, you talk about, having to work very hard to get locker rooms and court time in the Palestra. Can we talk a little bit about that and how you've seen the evolution through these last few years?
There's no question. When I arrived on campus, I was coaching basketball, and a little story here is that we were getting ready to play Oswego, and Oswego was in the lobby of the Palestra, and our current men's coach at that time refused to get off the court. We were waiting there for probably 30 to 45 minutes till he finished his practice. I can't even imagine anything like that today happening anywhere. The women practiced in Spurrier, and we came down to the alumni gym for games, and we had no locker room. So I went to the administration here and said, I think we have a visiting team locker room in the Palestra that should be turned over to the women. And that was a little bit of a struggle to put our visiting teams underneath the Palestra grandstands and turn the locker room upstairs into a varsity women's locker room. So little struggles like that. But as I said earlier, with my background, I had good confidence. I felt that this was the right thing to do. I didn't almost think twice about it. I just did it because it was the right thing for our kids to have these opportunities.
And what I will add, Chris, is that while I had a great experience and a great first head coach in the men, who also then nominated one of the outgoing male players to take over the women's team so we would have our own dedicated coach. There are also stories on the other side, as Jane have mentioned, right? Not only did the lawmakers fight to not make athletics a part of Title IX, the athletic directors and the presidents fought to make football not be considered in the Title IX legislation. And so if you think of, as you heard earlier, Title IX as a pie, and you want to exclude what is the largest slice of the pie in most athletic departments from the equity piece, you've set up a pretty unequitable situation. Once that failed and decisions had to be made along the monetary lines, Title IX then got blamed for everything. Every decision that was made against a male team or male student athletes, or as Jane said, the sharing of facilities, the sharing of spaces, the travel allowances, the food allowances, as athletic departments started to understand that they needed to incorporate the women into those numbers, it was at the expense, some felt, of men, and therefore Title IX got blamed for that. So the evolution has pitted males against females in the sports arena unfairly, because it really isn't as simple as we are taken away from the men to do the women. It really is, we are here, we are the women. Sarah is a direct benefit of that, and look how wonderful she is. She's 50 women in her program, and they need equal treatment.
Yeah. And Jackie, if I could just speak on that a little bit. In my sport in rowing, with men's rowing not a part of the NCAA, men's rowing has really shrunken a lot in the US. It used to be a really prestigious, popular sport for colleges, for men. And so over time, you kind of hear a lot of animosity sometimes from some male coaches that have seen men's rowing decline. And like you said, it's really easy to just kind of pin it all on Title IX. And it's, you know, it's over time, like you've seen women's rowing really explode, and we've been able to perform better on the grandstand against different countries because of that, actually. And men's rowing has kind of gone in the opposite direction. So it's easy to kind of place blame sometimes.
And to go along with all of that, at that time, and even through the 70s, early into the 80s, budgets were a challenge with many institutions. And Jackie's absolutely right. It was like, you know, we did this on purpose. Well, I don't think so. I think this was just something that we felt we had an opportunity to do, and we should be able to do it. So to get the universities to figure out how maybe to not so much take away from the men, but to offer to the women similar opportunities. I mean, I can remember arriving here and there were no training meals for women. I hadn't even heard of that. Whereas the men were having meals prior to every single game. So there were things that we weren't aware of because we were kind of operating in our own little bubble. But when things got more and more clairvoyant as far as what we were doing with each other's programs, it became more obvious that we needed to do something for an equity side of things.
Yeah, and I would, you know, I took a look at in the lobby of the Gergen Athletics Center is kind of a history of our athletics program. And a couple of things that popped out to me were in 1909, there was a basketball team, women's basketball team. They played 3 games. They won 27-3, 22-11, and 28-3 in those 3 games. So it shows at that point the strength of the women's basketball program that worked through Jane. And then now, if you take a look at our basketball team, who just won again last night, you know, we have several All-Americans. We have several trips to the NCAA, the Final Four. It's a tribute to that and what we've been able to do. So in that sense, I'm hearing a little bit about culture and, you know, the struggle, if you will, between looking at Title IX as maybe not an equity and a benefit for a group of people, but more so an us versus them piece. Have you thought at all about the cultural aspects of Title IX and how maybe Jackie or Jane or Sarah, in your roles, you have worked with the women and the men that you encounter to help them understand the importance of this legislation and the benefits that we're seeing for women now?
In my current role as the deputy AD and the deputy Title IX coordinator in the SWA, it's all tied to some women's hats in some way. And one of the things we try to do is to think about the needs, the individual needs of the program. And equity isn't always equal. But as a program, as an athletics department, it is incumbent upon us to remove gender from the equation and think of the sports and think of the needs of those individual sports and think of the needs of those student athletes in those individual sports and how do we meet and exceed those needs. And so if you think of it in that sort of base way, it really becomes not necessarily about Title IX, but about what it is as a department you are doing for your your stakeholders within your department, whether it's your student athlete, your coaches, your staff, your alumni. What are you doing for the stakeholders in your department? And that should not have necessarily a gender bias or a gender basis, unless you are forced to do it because of a gender basis, because you're not doing the right thing anyway. So if you think of it from a more holistic way, and you think of it in terms of what are the needs of my constituents, what are the needs of my stakeholders, and how do I meet those needs? And am I being fair and equitable across the board? It really does become a quite simple method for building your culture.
And I don't, when I think back, I mean, it's been a few years since I've been here, obviously, but we're in a culture right now that I don't even think that our students sometimes think twice about it, which is great. I mean, it's part of their accepted understanding of what they want to do, what's being provided for them. And it's all in a pretty good place compared to where we were 50 years ago. So.
And that's kind of what I was speaking to also, Jane, with me saying that's not something I even spent a lot of time thinking about as a varsity athlete, you know, at U of R. And I think that's why it's really important that that our athletes are told the history, and it's something that I'm excited to do a little bit of a better job with.
And that's vitally important, Sarah, because those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it. And so as we educate and we remind people of where we were and where we are, it helps us inform where we're going. And that's true for Title IX. As you have seen the law ebb and change, athletics was not an original part of the thought of when it was enacted. Athletics became very much a part of it. Sexual misconduct and gender representation is now at the forefront and moving forward. So as this changes, we really do have to remember what is the basis of those 37, 38 words? Where have we been? And where do we want to go? Because what we really want to do is continue to have young men and women who do not have to think about this, who understand and do this in the way that Sarah has described.
Yeah, and I would add too that, you know, there are those tangible things that we can point to, especially here at the University of Rochester. You know, Sarah and her program have a beautiful training center across the river that is accessible for our students. We recently, under Jane's guidance, have put the new locker rooms over in Genesee Hall for all of our outdoor teams. I mean, there's been some real tangible pieces. We're putting press boxes in on softball and baseball. So there have been tangible pieces too that I think really reinforce the idea, Jackie, of making sure we're looking at how our programs are benefiting and what's going on there. To that, if we all can put on our little future goggles, what do you see the next 50 years looks like for women in athletics?
Only getting stronger.
How so, Jane?
Well, I mean, I think that they're proud of what they're doing. They're happy doing it. They enjoy it, especially here at the university. I feel that our students obviously are very, very committed to excellence in the classroom. And when they step out on that field, I think that that's a priority to them as well. I mean, why do I waste my time here if I'm not going to try to do it well? So I think that our students have a culture within them that is all positive and moving forward. I see great things, even more great things coming out of our female athletes.
I agree. I think it's only getting stronger. And I think and part of my rationale for that response is because I think parents are having daughters, right? Men are having daughters. And as parents have daughters and these daughters grow up playing sports, the fight continues because they want to make sure that their sons and daughters are treated equitably. And they want to make sure that those resources are available. And I know in our athletic environment, there's a lot of emphasis on football and basketball. It's a return on investment. It's a rising tide rises all boats scenario that you will hear from athletic directors and you will hear from presidents. But as long as I said, those women who are part of that program are getting what they need to equally be as successful. I mean, if you look at some of the attendance numbers in Division I athletics, in basketball, in the fight in the Final Four, and women are no longer content, and men are no longer content for their daughters to be content. And so as that fight and that continuation happens, it can only get stronger.
Yeah, if you want to go have some fun, go watch Dawn Staley's basketball team at home. Oh, wow. That's fun. Or take some time and take your family to Oklahoma City and watch the College Women's World Series. I mean, it is just remarkable. Sarah.
I agree with everything Jane and Jackie just said, and I couldn't help but to also think about the continued education around trans individuals and non-binary individuals, and how I think that's an area that is really exciting for me personally to see expand, and making sure that all of our students feel welcome, and that, you know, the language that we use is inclusive. And I think it's just really exciting for me to see personally, because that is an area that I have seen change from when I was, in high school. So that is an area that I have seen growth. And so for me, that's really exciting. And it's just really exciting for all of our student athletes on campus that they're supported so well now.
Yeah, and I think in sport that can happen. We can be the first, we can be the leader to do that. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So to bring it back a little bit to some personal aspects and experiences, for me, my life was totally athletics. I was told when I was young that girls don't play baseball. I was told that. And, 30 years later, that same person was my biggest fan. And she ended up in the stands every time I had a game. So talk to us a little bit about really the personal impact that athletics has had for you. Jackie and Jane and myself have been in athletics our whole lives, competing, sailing, running, being an administrator. But how does that really frame what you do and who you are?
I don't know. I can't live without athletics in a way, because it's been such a part of my life. It's sort of, how do I say it? It's like not an expectation, but it's woven into my life. And when I think of some of the struggles that I've experienced, as I said earlier, I feel strongly about my background being given me the kind of confidence that I need to know that this is something I enjoy and that I want to pursue and I want to share with other people. I enjoyed teaching, I enjoyed the coaching, I enjoy leading, and athletics has been that vehicle which I have been able to sit upon and ride. So it's been a good trip. Thank you.
My athletic background, I started in a Harry Potter-esque British school system in the Caribbean. So it was part of that is the athletic part and the academic part were interwoven into house systems, just like Harry Potter. Having not done any sports in high school and then having been sort of a walk-on in college, my high school friends are, you do what for a living? So it is quite a little bit, but I think for me, it's the lessons that you learn in athletics that I cannot live without. They form the very basis of my being. It's the resiliency, it's the forthrightness, it's the honesty, It is the ability to be quantitative. It's the ability to work well in a team setting and to be able to collaborate. Those are all skills that are honed. Now you can learn, I'm not saying that only athletics can teach you those skills, but certainly athletics teaches you those skills in a much more direct way and every day as you step out on your playing field, surface, pool, boat. And so the skills that make the core essence of who I am were honed in athletics and would not have been possible had not for Title IX and all the people who supported Title IX. I would have walked into that locker room and I would have had to just turn around and go back. And that would have lost, my value system probably still would have grown, but it will not have grown as quickly as being out of Genesee in the cold and getting thumped.
I know, I often think about what if I didn't have the opportunity to play and to educate through athletics. It's hard to imagine. Sarah.
I think I appreciate you calling on me. Something I've been thinking about too is the benefits of athletics on students and the rest of their experiences on campus, and the benefits with mental health, with learning how to prioritize their time. I think oftentimes there's this thought that athletics is completely separate from the student's life on campus. And in always, in my opinion, athletics can really help uplift students, help teach them tools that will make them better students. And so it's something that we talk a lot about on my team, and the importance of athletics and using it to improve your mental health. And I think it's just something that oftentimes people that are not in our circle, they don't really realize that. I know that's not mind-blowing to any of you guys, but to a lot of people on campus, I think that thought is pretty surprising. Usually the idea is athletics takes away from students and what other things they can do on campus. But I think it really enriches their experience, and it helps them with other things that they're doing on campus. That's what I've really noticed with my student athletes, and also just from myself as a student athlete.
Sarah, if I was a rower, I'd want you to be my director of rowing. You are a great future for this and for our students.
Thank
you. I appreciate you. So let's pick up and get some questions here from some of the folks listening in. Our first question is from Diane Ennis. Jane, that name may sound familiar. Wow, Jane, Spurrier stories are resonating with me. One of my best coaches ever. I think that would be a sentiment for 40 years of coaching. How worried are you about the future administrations or courts scaling back the protections for Title IX?
I'm not worried at all. We're too strong and too intense right now to let anything change that. And it's just been the culture for the last, 20 years to be a little bit more forthright and coming out with what we feel is strong and what we feel we deserve. So I'm not worried. But thanks for thinking of it, Diane. It's good to hear your voice.
Chris,
Jackie or Sarah or Dick? Yep.
Yeah. One of the things that I've enjoyed during my tenure at the UA is watching the impact of the formation of the UAA on the acceleration of Title IX and gender equity efforts and the growth of women's sports on the member campuses of the UAA. And this fall, we really had a benchmark event when the NYU men's and the University of Chicago men's soccer teams played each other. Kim Wyant was the head coach of the NYU men's program, and Julianne Stitch, the head coach of the University of Chicago men's program. Is the first NCAA contest in any sport where the two coaches of men's teams were women. That's really a hallmark event. But on the other hand, over time, the number of women in head coaching positions across all sports in the NCAA has shrunk since the early days when almost all coaches of women's teams were women. What are from your own experience, and I know Jane, I'm sure you went through this when you decided to start your family. I know Sharon and I went through that. What are the particular challenges that women face in terms of family and other pressures around coaching, and what do you think can be done to support women to ensure that we have strong women, strong role models in leadership roles in women's athletics and men's athletics for our student athletes?
No, it was surely a difficult, in a way, a little bit difficult situation to decide that you're going to have a family. And not only did I have one, but there are 6 of them. And they're all, I mean, I think they were all supportive. My husband was very supportive of my work, and I absolutely had a wonderful nanny that came to the house every day for 20 years. So a lot of those things had to be in order for sure. But I think as we give opportunities to women and continue to and give them powerful experiences that are going to live with them for a long time, this gives them the strength to know that, okay, I can do this and I can go on. And in a way, I'm not too worried about right now not having enough women in it, because I think they are also developing other absolute wonderful interests in their lives that are taking them down all kinds of roads in leadership and in research, that maybe those opportunities weren't necessarily something that we had back in the 70s. So I think as long as we keep the premise that we are doing this for the best of our students and the growth of the university, I think we're in good shape.
Our next question from Cheryl LaMonica. Do you think that women's sports have more resources with NCAA funding versus AIAW? Unfortunately, at most colleges, the majority of funding goes to men's basketball and football programs. Sports like swimming and diving get less funded because of this, unless the team is nationally ranked.
I think, as I mentioned earlier, it is running I can speak to a Division I football program, lower level Division I FCS football program, U of R football program. It is an awful lot of money to run a football program. And there is only so much within your budget. The key becomes, are you funding your swimming and diving programs to the extent that the swimming and diving programs can be successful? If you look at the funding needed for a swimming and diving program, it is less than the funding needed for a 120-person football program. And so that's the reality. Whether we like it or not, it's the reality. And so it is incumbent upon people like me to make sure, and this also answers Dick's former question, and I don't have kids, but it's incumbent upon people like me to make sure that when we allocate funding, when we allocate resources, when we hire staff, when we hire coaches, that we are intentional in finding women, people of color, underrepresented groups, and making sure that they have an opportunity as well. And it's incumbent upon us, when we look at our overall budgets, that we look at the programs we're supporting and make sure that those programs are also being supported to the extent. Part of the issue that is national is that salaries for some of the top sports have gone haywire, right? Television rights have produced more money. What we're paying coaches is extraordinary. We are in an arms race for facilities. That puts more pressure on then being able to fill those stadiums. And so that's some of the parity that you're seeing and that we wrestle with on a daily basis.
So the last question for today, this is from Anonymous. How do you best protect the educational opportunities of sports in light of the rapid professionalization of sports within higher education?
I think giving people opportunity to grow and to be explore different things of their interest is still important. And the more we do that, I think we expand the opportunities for our women and our men out there in the world. Do I think that it's a perfect scenario right now? Maybe not, but I'm not too worried about its success as we move forward.
That question almost makes me feel like the author of it sits on the Division I Council and on the NCAA Division II and III boards. That is the question that all of college sports is wrestling with at this point. How do we continue to elevate the educational aspect of sport when we have transfer portals and movement across Division I, II, and III, and we have professionalization? You know, you get a lot of one and dones in Division I basketball, and how do we make? And now NIL has raised its head, and so as name, image, and likeness will filter down to every aspect of college sports, it changes the landscape of what is considered professionalization versus what is considered that educational component. And so I wish I had an easy answer. It's the question we wrestle with every meeting that we're involved with. And it's the question that all college administrators, Division I, II, and III are wrestling with. How do we maintain the integrity of what college athletics, I won't say it's supposed to be because some people have a different view on that, but what we expect from college athletics and what we're doing for these young men and women, and in this case, and in this conversation, are especially our young women, and are not all consider women, or whatever your pronoun is, we really need to tackle the professional piece of this as we move forward. It is the biggest piece that's coming through with athletics in the collegiate space today, in my opinion.
Do you think it's here to stay though, or is this just obviously maybe coming from what happened in 2020?
I think a little bit of it's here to stay, but I think like all things, it's gone way over the spectrum on one side, and now we have to equalize it and sort of bring it back to the middle to figure out what is the norm so that it can move forward. And the lawsuits, right, are driving a lot of this, and the optics of it, and each state is enacting its own laws at this point. And so getting our hands collectively around all of this is really the challenge. So it's a question that resonates because it is exactly the question that college athletics is facing.
I agree.
Yeah, it's not something that we talk a lot about in my with my peers that are other rowing coaches. It's difficult to make money off of our sport, but it's something that it is interesting with most men's rowing programs are club programs, and so they're fully self-funded. So that's definitely an interesting dynamic there with men's rowing programs having to self-fund, and so there is conversation about it being a little bit of an extra toll on those students, having, you know, in that way, it's making it a little bit harder for them. It creates a little bit of a barrier for them to join rowing teams on the men's side. But it's something that we're really aware of on my team, and we make a real effort to make sure that everybody on campus knows that that if they want to try rowing and if they want to be on the rowing team, that's something that they can do regardless of if they're able to afford the dues for being on the team. So a little bit different than what you all are talking about, but that's kind of the conversation that we have to make sure that it's equitable on our side.
Well, I just want to take a second to thank Jane, Sarah, and Jackie for your expertise, your insight, and your years and years of experience. Just a little plug here, women's basketball, the University of Rochester plays Nazareth tomorrow night at 8 o'clock in the Palestra. So if you're looking for something to do, you're going to see a lot of 3-point goals and a lot of pushing the offense. So thank you very much. This has been a great conversation.
And
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I'd
Chris.
like to thank our 4 panelists, Chris, Jane, Jackie, Sarah, for all that you've done, the opportunities, the mentorship, leadership that you provided to young women and men at our institutions, particularly at the University of Rochester and across intercollegiate athletics. You've been wonderful role models. I know you have for me. I know that several of you have been for my son and daughter as well. So thank you for everything you've done. With that, I also want to thank our attendees this morning. And Jane, I think he has a couple of words to say before we sign off.
Yes, this was a wonderful event, and thank you everyone for your excellent contributions and your participation. Of those of you, I know a few people were disappointed that we had to move to virtual only. We hope to have the June event, our forum in June we're in the very active planning stages for that. We hope that will be live. So please watch for details, and it was great to see everyone.